Hello and welcome to today's lesson on percents. So with an introduction to percents, let's say you took a 100-question test. How many questions did you get correct if your score was 85%? So think about that for a second. Well, if you got an 85%, well, that actually means you got 85 out of those 100. So really we're talking a part to whole relationship. 85 out of a whole of 100, well, we can always write that as a fraction. And really that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about percents, writing them as fractions, and fractions, writing them as percents. They have the same meaning. They are just represented two different ways. So we're just representing the same thing two different ways. All right, so let's look at some double number lines to help us look at it some more. So again, you have that 100-question test. How many questions did you get correct for each of the percentages? Well, obviously if you got 100%, you would have gotten 100 correct. And 90% means 90. And we go on down the line and see that for a 100-question test, it matches up. The percent is how many you got correct all the way down to 0. And again, as we mentioned in the introduction, we can go ahead and represent that as a part-to-whole relationship as a fraction as well. So here are the percents, here are the questions we got correct, and then to write these as a fraction, if we got 100 questions correct out of 100 questions possible, then our fraction would be 100 out of 100. And then as a fraction, we got 90 out of 100. And 80 out of 100. And we go on down the line and we see that for each percent, it is the number we got correct out of those 100 questions. And obviously we can simplify these. So 100 over 100 is equivalent to 1. Let's say 80 over 100, that actually simplifies to 8/10, which actually simplifies down to 4/5. Obviously 50% simplifies to 1/2, and you get the idea. We can take any percent, write it as a fraction over 100, then simplify it to a fraction. And again, we have the same meaning, just written two different ways. So if you ate 50% of a banana, you ate half of a banana. Right? So let's go through the formal definition. A percent is a part-to-whole ratio where the whole is 100. So 60% is 60 out of 100. The part is 60. Per means we're dividing. Again, that fraction bar means division. 100. When I think of percent as a fraction, I like to think, kind of break down the word. So a percent means percent. The stem cent means 100, so per 100. And in math, per means divided by. So percent means divide by 100. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to set up a percentage as a fraction over 100, then simplify that fraction. So here are several examples. So 35% is written as 35 per 100, and then simplify. These are both divisible by 5, and you get 7/20. So 35% of something is the same thing as 7/20 of something. 100%, as you might guess, is 100 out of 100, which is simply 1 whole. So if you have 100% of something, you have 1 whole of that thing. So if you ate 100% of the pie, that means you ate 1 whole pie. Now we could have percents greater than 100. A lot of stock prices go up by more than 100%. So in this case, we still write that percent per 100 divided by 100 and simplify. And that 174% simplified is 87 over 50. And I'm okay if you leave it like this, but you could also write it as a mixed number. And the mixed number would be 1 and 37/50. Notice, more than 100% means we have a value greater than 1 as a fraction because 100% is 1 whole. So we have 100% is the 1 whole, and then this 37/50ths is actually the 74%. So the 74% is actually 37/50ths, and this 100% is actually 1. And together we get 1 and 37/50ths. All right, the last trickier one is when we have a decimal and a percent. We still start out the same way. We write it as 5.5, write it as the number over 100, but then we want to eliminate this decimal. And to eliminate the decimal, we're going to multiply by a multiple of 10 that matches that place value. So if we were to say this number in good math grammar, we would say this is 5 and 5/10. So that tenths tells us immediately we need to multiply numerator and denominator by 10 to eliminate that decimal. So 5.5 times 10 is 55, 100 times 10 is 1,000. Notice this represents the same thing, just without that decimal. All right, so then simplify and we get 11/200ths. So here are some for you to try. All right, so A simplifies to 1/20th, 5% is 1/20th, 36% is 9/25ths, 124% is 31/25ths, or 1 and 6/25ths. Again, this 100% is the 1, 24% is 6/25ths. Together you have 1 and 6/25ths. And then the trickier one, 8/10ths of a percent, is 8/10ths over 100. First multiply by 10 to get 8 over 1,000, then simplify to 1 over 125. Here's some more to try. Now this last one can be a little tricky, so I did help you out. So this is 2 and 75/100ths%. So 75/100ths means we need to multiply by 100 to get rid of that decimal. All right, so 75% is 3/4. 1,000% is actually 10 over 1, which is 10. 83% is just 83 over 100, can't be simplified. 2 and 75/100ths% is 11 over 400. Now let's go the other way. Let's start with a fraction and go to a percent. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that fraction and we want to set up an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. And we can use common factors to get to 100 or cross multiply and divide. Now cross multiply and divide we're going to work on in a future lesson, so we're not going to worry about this one today. So here are some examples. Again, our goal is write the original fraction as a fraction per 100. And if we can write it as a fraction per 100, well, anything over 100 can be written as a percent. So we started with 3/4. And we want to know what is 3/4 written as an equivalent fraction with 100 as the denominator. Well, I know I could go 4 times 25 is 100, so then 3 times 25 is 75. 75 per 100 means we have 75%. 40 over 25, well, 25 times 4 gets us to 100, so 40 times 4 is 160. Again, 160 per 100 means we have 160%. Now, sometimes if we have a denominator greater than 100, we need to divide, we need to scale down to get to 100. So 200 divided by 2 is 100. 88 divided by 2 is 44. 44 per 100 is 44%. All right, so here's some for you to try. So 7/10ths is equivalent to 70%. 101/50ths is 202%. 99 1,000ths, notice we have to scale down by dividing by 10 to get to 100. We do have a decimal in our fraction, but that's okay because percents can have decimals. So 99 1,000ths is 9 9/10%. Let's look at a couple more examples that are a bit more tricky. So if we wanted to write 1 21/50ths as a percent, there's multiple ways to do it, but how I would recommend doing it is take the 1 and do that separately, then take the fraction portion, the part to whole, 21/50ths, and do that separately. Because 1 21/50ths is the same as 1 plus 21/50ths. All right, well, how do we write 1 as a fraction with 100 in the denominator? Well, first we put 1 over 1. Seems kind of silly, but 1 over 1. Scale it up by 100 to get 100 over 100, which is 100%. Now, the more you work with this, you'll know that 1 whole means 100%, and you could kind of skip all of this. So 1 whole will always be 100%. 2 wholes would be 200%. 3 wholes would be 300%. So then let's focus on the fraction portion. So 21/50ths, well, 50 times 2 is 100, 21 times 2 is 42, so that's 42%. So now we can just add those two together, and we get a final answer of 142%. So 1 21/50ths is 142%. And then last but not least, for E, there's really nothing special except it has this decimal in here again. Really, our focus is the denominator. We scale our denominator of 10 to get to 100 by multiplying by 10. 0.08 times 10 is 0.8. So 0.8 per 100, 8/10 per 100 is 8/10%. All right, so use these as a model for these next two. All right, so 1 9/25ths is 136%. And then 6/10 over 20 is equivalent to 3%. All right, so use these examples and on your own as a guide as you work with percents and fractions.